Hi, welcome back to the Religion of Human Nature podcast. This is a really special episode. In the last episode, we do a one-on-one conversation with someone who I think is a really deep thinker about a specific topic. Today's topic is community, and I'm not sure there's anyone better to have than Congresswoman Angie Craig, who serves the 2nd District here in Minnesota. Angie, how are you today?
Rabbi, I'm good, but we often simply say, "Oh, I'm good. How are you?" But Minnesota's been roiling here in the last several days from the murder of George Floyd and people both rioting and coming together. So the truth is, I'm conflicted today as I join you.
Yeah, that's, I think, totally fair. We were talking about this earlier. I sent questions over, which I do to all my guests, about a week or two in advance, and the world drastically changed. I think you hit it. I don't have words to explain how I'm feeling right now. And it's hard because I imagine if my congregation wants me to feel a certain way, besides pain and grief, which we're all feeling, but how to sum all up these words in the middle of a pandemic, I can only imagine for someone in Congress it's even amplified that much more.
Well, it is. It's been an opportunity over the last several days for me to listen to my colleagues, particularly in the Congressional Black Caucus, and to listen to my community. And I have this experience from a different point of view. My wife and I, we've been married for 12 years now, and we have 4 sons. And so, the allies that I've had to the gay community over the years really serve as my guide of how I should behave now. And that's to be an ally of the Black community, to be an ally to seek racial justice in this country. And so, but I also am a legislator. So we have to get to work on legislation as well. And I think the death of George Floyd has really just accelerated the work that we have to do in this country.
Absolutely. So I want to get into community, which is the topic today. It's a broad topic, but an important one. And one of the reasons I really was excited about you being a guest, besides just thinking you're really cool, is your personal story. You're serving here in Minnesota, but you're not from Minnesota. You have mentioned several times, and I've heard you speak about, as you did just a minute ago, about the different communities you hold, whether that's on a personal level or in your district. Why don't you tell people a little bit about your communities and who you look to and who you represent and where you come from?
Yeah, it's really fascinating. I often start with, I wish I'd been born and raised in Minnesota, but I chose Minnesota. And my wife and I, we chose Minnesota because it's the kind of community where we believed that we could be accepted, that our children could grow up in a community that would really be accepting of our family. And, the truth is I grew up in Arkansas. You can hear a little bit of that still in me, no matter what I do. And, I grew up in a trailer park. I grew up to a single mom who raised 3 kids with the help of my grandmother. My grandmother dipped heels in glue in a union shoe factory. She came home with glue stuck on her every single day. That's what I remember the most. And, I'm only one of a few kids who got out of that trailer park. And, not to diminish that community, that was affordable housing. That is still affordable housing in this country. And so the district that I represent it's diverse. It's urban folks in the northern part of my districts. It's suburban folks. For over 20 years, I got up every day and working my way up a Fortune 500 company all the way to the executive team. And I put on a suit and I went to work just like the people who live in the suburbs of this district. And then I go out to the rural areas of my district. And, it's folks like my grandfather who raised rice on a farm until the 1980s farm crisis took out his farmer and he lost his job. So, community, it means a lot of different things in my district, but I guess what I've discovered the most in representing this district is that you may think about someone being a Democrat or a Republican or an independent, but when I talk to folks here, I talk about values, and I talk about the things that really we have in common, not the things that divide us. And I personally think we need more of that in Congress and sort of in community.
So we touched on this before we started recording, which is maybe I'm outing myself now. I'm not a down ballot anything. I really try to do my research on every candidate. I know not every candidate, no candidate can represent everything that I do. That's just impossible, and I don't believe anyone should expect that. I look for people, when I'm looking at candidates, who have understanding of diverse backgrounds, can treat first and foremost people with respect and empathy, regardless if they agree with them politically. So you have to listen to so many communities in your position. How do you divide your time, soak it in, and represent all those communities, especially maybe even harder, maybe it's harder that you represent people you may disagree with?
Yeah, the title is representative, and I actually take that word pretty seriously. And that means that, I need to listen to everybody in our community. And even when I fundamentally may disagree with their policy views. And I think if, we've now done 17 town halls since I took this, was sworn into this job. And I think if you ask the people, mostly, a little further right Republicans in this district, how they're treated at my town halls, even though I may politely disagree with them on policy, I truly do respect where they're coming from, because I know it's from a place that they actually are being authentic to. They believe what they believe. And, what I've tried to do as representative here is be authentic. Who I am is a lot of things. And when you sort of start to lay it all out, I'm a former healthcare leader at a major manufacturing company. I'm a mother of 4 boys, and I've survived middle school 4 times. I'm a wife, and I'm married to a woman. So, I'm a sister who helped raise her 2 siblings because my mom was a single mom. I'm all of those things, and I'm a lesbian who happens to hold a Republican seat in the U.S. Congress. And so I honestly believe that the most important things that people want to know is that you respect them, even if you disagree with them, that you're honest with them. They don't want you to, show up and tell them, what they want to hear. They want to know that you're being authentic to who you are and what you stand for. And I just, I personally think that we don't have to agree with each other on everything. I mean, I look at the Democratic Party. I mean, I don't agree with Democrats on everything, just in my own caucus, much less across the aisle. But I think especially for voters like you, for constituents like you, you want to know that you can trust that if I tell you something, I'm going to tell you the truth, and that I'm truly here working to listen and to represent this district. And, I sometimes say, look, I had a career, and it was a great career. I was a journalist for 4 years, and I worked in 2 healthcare manufacturing companies. And personally, I never thought about is that young girl growing up in the trailer park who went to college, driving out of that mobile home court. I never thought that I would be in the top 10 of executives at a major Fortune 500 company someday. And so from my perspective, look, I have been given so much good fortune, and so much good blessings. And for me, this is about, how do I make it such that, everybody's got a fighting chance to have the good life that they want to live.
Great. So that's a lot of background. I think the stuff you're doing is incredible. And I want to talk a little bit about the work you're doing in the country. Obviously, some of that has changed with COVID-19, but maybe some of the committees you're on are even more important now than they've ever been. So you sit on the committee in small business, discuss this, sort of what your relationship is to building community through like the small businesses and also during now, how are we going to bounce back? Like, what are some of those things we really need to do?
Well, I think we have a lot of tough choices. I've worked with about 350 businesses since COVID-19 really started to spread. And, I've made it a point. I own part of a small business in St. Paul myself, even today, a little startup company with about 15 employees. And so I understand that, these are not just brick and mortar businesses. Often these are somebody's dream. And often it's, a third generation dream. And so to me, at the broader policy level, this has always been about how do we keep the engine of the economy running while we manage through a public health crisis, and what are the policy things that we need to be doing? I think some of it we've gotten right. I was a strong proponent of the Paycheck Protection Program to keep as many people employed as we possibly could. It has worked for some industry sectors a lot better than others. Obviously, restaurants who've been told to shut your doors, it's not a great program for if you literally have had to shut your doors. So I think there's some changes that we can make to make that program better. But, this is going to be a very difficult economy to start back up if we don't keep the engine on. And so a strong supporter of the unemployment insurance that we've put into the hopper here to help folks survive. And I've been listening a lot to the president of the Minneapolis Fed, who is a former Republican gubernatorial candidate in the state of California, who I have a lot of respect for, Neil Kaskari. And at the end of the day, there's some tough political decisions that we've made and that we're going to have to make. I tend to be a little bit more of a socially progressive, fiscally moderate Democrat, certainly supportive of job creation and startups and business. But we've got to help as many of these Main Street businesses, the mom and pop shops, as we can during this period. So, I think we've got some tough decisions ahead of us as a country, and my goal is to make the right policy decisions. What I've learned in my first term in Congress and through the course of running for Congress and in my career is that, if you do the right thing, it'll all turn out okay. Politics is a contact sport. I have to face re-election every 2 years in the U.S. House. And it's real easy, I think, for people who are in these positions to make short-term decisions because of the cycle of elections. But we're talking about, whether or not this country, when we look back in the history books, has suffered a recession or a depression. And so I, for one, want to be on the right side of the policy decisions during this public health crisis and, be damned the political side of it.
That's great. Yeah. So I remember.
Can I say be damned to a rabbi?
Yeah. Listen, I don't know how many people know me, but there's a lot worse said to me. I'm that kind of rabbi. What my best friend says to me, never stop being the hip rabbi. And I said, there was an article written once when I moved here that called me a hip rabbi. And I said, okay, I could have been called a lot worse. I'll take it.
There you go.
One of the things I'm watching around the country a lot is that every state has its own sort of engine, right? Like we call it, the United States of America, but really what's going on in Minnesota sometimes is totally different than what's going on in the realities of, let's say, New York and how we're dealing with COVID-19 and the severity of it and how much hospital room we're so blessed here with so many of these medical companies here, which is an advantage that Minnesota has, I would say. So how do we as a state understand our own community breakdown? And do we play a larger role in the rest of the United States? So how do you bring those voices to the country as a whole versus dividing them up here?
Yeah, it is a real challenge, right? Because, if I think about the public health response to COVID-19, my view is, that we actually should have had perhaps more of a federal response in certain areas. You know, I think about this access to personal protective equipment and this idea that we've got, you know, that we, especially in the beginning, that we had states competing against each other, that we had the federal government swooping in and taking equipment away from a state before that delivery could be created. You know, I helped found the Supply Chain Caucus in the U.S. Congress, and who would have thought that supply chain would be a sexy topic that I'd be talking about now? But you know, you think about a healthcare supply chain and risk mitigation of supply chains. If you think about, you know, my own company that I worked for, where we had 6 divisions, we never in the corporate group would have allowed our 6 divisions to compete against one another and end up basically driving up the cost for everyone within the business. So, you know, partly how I've behaved during the public health crisis during COVID-19 is, you know, I'm not interested in going back 3 years and saying, well, this administration should have done this or that. I mean, there's going to be plenty of time to do the review of how prepared were we for a global pandemic, right? And what the United States' role in this should have been. But I do think it's fair to say we should have a federal supply chain strategy for personal protective equipment, for our food supply chain. You know, I think that's fair. And you're right, when you devolve those decisions to the state levels, you're going to have very different outcomes. And some of it is unavoidable. I mean, I'll give you an example of the unemployment insurance. You know, the Fed believes that the most important policy that we have passed so far in the CARES Act is actually providing unemployment insurance to laid off members of our community, because we've been able to stave off a banking crisis, you know, a housing crisis, a mortgage crisis as a result of that action. On the other hand, you know, I was just on the phone with a family member today who was talking about, you know, being approved for unemployment insurance now 55 days ago in another state. Now, I think Minnesota has been much more effective at implementing the policies, but you're right. The quality comes down to, you know, often the execution at a state level. And, you know, and at the federal level, we're not that great at executing across the nation either. I mean, a good example of that is the SBA's execution of these EIDL grants and loans, the economic injury disaster assistance loans that we promised Americans. And it, you know, the system was overwhelmed with demand. So it's a real balancing act, and it's hard to get right. But I think, you know, the things that we can do at a national level, you know, we should think about, and there are some things we should be doing at a state level. But at the end of the day, you know, this is, you know, we're not, you know, we're not divided as a country. Every single one of us are going through a COVID-19 pandemic right now. Our peaks may be at different times, but we are the United States of America. And I personally think we need leadership in this country. And I don't care if it's a Republican or a Democrat, but we need leadership in this country that seeks to bring us together, that seeks to listen to everyone in our community, even those who have been historically marginalized.
Yeah, you know, you said you're a great segue into the next question, because I had a meeting. It was like I think it was my last in-person meeting before COVID-19 took place. Okay. It's a man who I work with through an outside organization for the synagogue, and something I'm very passionate about. And we work very well together. We're very productive, but we were having a little bit of clash in sort of communication. And I quickly realized it's because he comes from a world in which everyone is trying to take advantage of him. And in the Jewish world in which I come from, everyone's trying to take care of each other. And I said to him, I want you to know, I will never, ever take advantage of you. If any, I gave him a gift once and he said, you know, he thought there were strings attached. And I was like, no, this is your favorite baseball player. I want to give you this gift of his. It's just what we do. As you probably know, in the Jewish community, that's a normal gesture. For him, it was like, yeah. What do I owe you? Well, you don't owe me anything. It's a gift. So I said to him, I think that that is what I look for after is how do we as a nation and statewide and nation come together as a whole and say we're all in this together. And that means the person who's struggling and the person who's the most affluent and the person who got sick and the person who was not social distancing. And we're trying to understand why each person chose. I think you spoke to leadership. I think Governor Walz has been incredible at saying, I am responsible.
Yeah. And
not pointing fingers. And that's what I've marveled at his leadership during this time, just saying, I'm responsible. If it fails, he's not suggesting that everything he's doing is going to be perfect and correct. He's trying. And he says, so how do we as a nation, let's say the government at this point, because there's a lot that's going to happen between now and November, right? How do we as a nation say, we're going to take responsibility for each other? How do we do this on a national level?
Wow, boy, if you could figure that out, you might be able to win the presidency as an independent right now. I still come back to, I think most people are good. Most people want to give to our neighbors. Just think about what's happened around the country and in Minneapolis and in South Minneapolis. I'm out here in Eagan in the suburbs, and last Sunday, I was standing there with a group of citizens who less than 24 hours before had put a pop-up drop-off for supplies for South Minneapolis. And there were lines and lines of cars, and there were, folks who were directing traffic to drop off those goods. If you're down in South Minneapolis, like we were this weekend, my wife and I, literally sweeping up shards of broken glass. I think part of it is just recognizing that the nation is broken, and that's okay, because in that brokenness, we can learn to listen to one another, to understand each other with empathy. And we need leaders who are empathetic, because unless we have that, it's going to be very, very difficult. And one of the most amazing things about the Congress that I currently serve in, there were 85 new members of Congress who came in together in the 116th Congress, is just how many of us have lived life experiences that are very similar to our constituents. You talked about the Jewish community. My family is a little unique. I'm a good Lutheran, ECLA, out at Grace Lutheran in Apple Valley. And my wife is Jewish, and our family belongs to Shur Tikva in Minneapolis. So, I think you're a really cool rabbi too. Hip rabbi, but I don't want to offend Rabbi Latz by calling you the hippest in the Twin Cities.
That's fair. I spoke with him yesterday. He's pretty hip.
Well, but I've often said, and one of the things I did in 2018 is I am not going to give God in whatever form someone believes over to a political party. I am not going, as a Christian, going to give that over to a political party, because I believe that our values, no matter what political hat we put on, are often very, very similar. And so as I talk to people, the question is, how do we stop health disparities in this country? Why do Black women die at 3 times the rate of white women in childbirth in this country? Does anyone here think that's fair? How do we make sure that our law enforcement is applying service to our communities in the same way to Black Americans as white Americans? How do we stand up together across religions, across political parties, against what we know in our core is right and wrong? And, we've had these hard conversations. And Rabbi, maybe one of the reasons why, when I go into a town hall and someone stands up to me and says, well, I don't agree with the Equality Act. I don't think LGBTQ folks should have the same civil rights as other Americans. Maybe when they stand up and they say that to me, one of the reasons that I stand there a little longer and listen a little harder that people would often believe that I would, is because, you know, we have to understand where people are to get them to a different place. We can't just wish it on them. But we also can't not have the conversation, because, you know, this happened to me at a town hall, and my wife was there, and she said to me after, "I can't believe how calm you were with that individual." And I think, you know, growing up in a very, very conservative Christian household in the South, where, you know, I had to listen and come to terms in my adulthood with a lot of the things that had been hammered in me as a child, with ideas that honestly I knew were wrong. And, you know, my faith was, I grew up in the Church of Christ, you know, the only Christian denomination that's going to heaven, remember? And so, you know, you have to listen and understand where people are coming from before you can have a conversation about where you are. And at the end of the day, I just think we need to listen to each other just a little more and give each other a little more space for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you spoke about also, community is about taking responsibility, both from our leadership, but also for each other, right? You are watching incredible acts of kindness through just pain. And that is, and you know, it's been hard to be clergy, as I'm sure every single one of my clergy men and women would agree during this time, not only because we're also dealing with our own feelings and how do we flush those out, but with social media and things, people want responses immediately. Or if I don't take a picture at a certain site, I didn't do my job. And we're all working in different ways. We're all taking responsibilities, and you can't place what you think on someone else, because we're all in this. We really are all in this together. I want the last question, sort of before we sort of get into some other stuff, is that, you know, coming out of, let's say, what have we learned deeply about communities post COVID-19, and can we, how do we do better in our communities? Is there, you know, do you have a recommendation that you're seeing out there? You spoke about the sweeping up and that kind of stuff, but, you know, are you learning from small businesses something that we could replicate here anywhere, where just as individuals?
Yeah, you know, what's fascinating is there is so much community in the healing. And I think, you know, we always think about where we're trying to get to. And, you know, my job is to legislate, and we will be legislating. You know, we will be listening to the Black community through some of the events of the last few days. We will be legislating, but, you know, the process of healing, you can see it taking place right now. The process of change. I have to tell you, I think this may just be different. I know we've seen, you know, so many actions in the past where you say, well, it looks, you know, I think things are going to change. But as people sweep up the streets, as they hand out water, as they mourn together, you know, it is, America never really went through facing its own history on race and racism. It's never really reconciled. You know, I think about South Africa and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and some of the work that country did. And we need to reconcile the history, but we also have to recognize the present. That, you know, Black men are incarcerated at multiples of white men for the same drug offenses in this country. That in our policing, use of force statistics are so much higher for people of color. You know, that, again, Black women die in childbirth in 3 times the rate of white women. You know, this is not just history, this is today. And I think it's understanding and giving each other a little space, because, you know, the words are not going to always be exactly right, you know, and we're going to have to, again, learn how to be good allies. I think that the Jewish American community standing up during the civil rights movement is part of the history of America. I think about, you know, all of the folks who stood during the gay rights movement, and in particular in the marriage rights movement here in Minnesota. And I think we're all going to have to learn to be allies. We're all going to have to learn kind of what our role in this, but make no mistake about it, we all have a role in this.
Beautifully said. So I want to give you an opportunity to plug your website and plug your any charity you want to promote. So tell us a little bit about what's going on and where people can find you and all that.
Well, Rabbi Fine, thank you for having me today. I'm really, really honored to be here. My campaign website is angiecraig.com. And I tell you that not to, you know, go to my website for political purposes, but the point is that you'll get, I think, a sense of who I am and why I ran for Congress and why I'd like to be here from that website. And then, you know, for me, growing up, you know, I was the kid on free and reduced lunch. You know, I was at a school earlier this week in the district, and they've seen exponential increase since COVID-19, and the unemployment rate in Dakota County is 23% right now. That's huge. And so, you know, I often spend a lot of my personal energy on food security issues. I was that kid. And so charities like the Open Door in my congressional district, Second Harvest Heartland, are very important to me. So yeah, it really is humbling and an honor to represent this very unique district. And if nothing else, I hope that the people of this district understand that representative means something to me.
So thank you for your time. Thank you. I mean, it really means a lot. And so because I'm a rabbi and I have a congregation, I don't publicly endorse any congregants, just so you know, congregants, congresswomen. I don't endorse congregants either. But people running for office. Here's what I will say. Angie, as a person, it's been incredible getting to know you. And I thank you. And we need leaders in our world who are people like you. Forget about your politics. We'll debate that a different time. That's a different show. But you as a human being mean so much to this country and to Minnesota. And I'm thanking on behalf of my family and the people I work with, because the work you're doing, and just by listening and your voice and your experience, you make our world a better place. And we need that now.
Well, thank you, Rabbi, and thank you for the work that you're doing in your congregation. This country needs us all right now. Thank you.